The invasion of Taiwan would have significant consequences on the Chinese, Taiwanese, and American economies. It would be in the best interest of all parties to avoid any conflict because of the severe consequences if war were to break out. A Washington think tank called the Center for Strategic and International Studies conducted one of the most extensive simulations of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan by simulating the scenario over 20 times, and they made the following conclusions on the military impact of the conflict. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the United States and Japan would lose dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of service members. Such losses would damage the U.S. global position for many years, the report said. In most scenarios, the U.S. Navy would lose two aircraft carriers and 20 to 20 large surface combatants. Approximately 3,200 U.S. troops would be killed in 3 weeks of combat, nearly half of what the U.S. lost in 2 decades of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. China also suffers heavily. Its navy is in shambles, and the core of its amphibious forces is broken, and tens of thousands of soldiers are prisoners of war, the report said. The report also estimated that China would suffer 10,000 troops killed and lose 155 combat aircraft and 138 major ships in just a couple of weeks. While Taiwan's military is unbroken, it is severely degraded, left to defend a damaged economy on an island without electricity and basic services, the report said. The island's army would suffer about 3,500 casualties, and all 26 destroyers and frigates in its navy will be sunk, according to the report. Japan is likely to lose more than 100 combat aircraft and 26 warships, while the U.S. military bases on its home territory will come under Chinese attack. Wars happen even when objective analysis might indicate that the attacker might not be successful, according to the report. And even if the United States win, according to the report, the United States might win a Pyrrhic victory, suffering more in the long run than the defeated Chinese. Victory is not everything. The world would also suffer economically as well, because the largest chip manufacturer in the world, TSMC, is based in Taiwan. And keep in mind that these chips power almost everything in the tech industry, like iPhones and cars. If China would invade Taiwan, that would be the biggest impact we've seen to the global economy possibly ever, according to Glenn O'Donnell, the vice president and research director at Forrester. This could be bigger than 1929, as he continues to say. And given how predominant Taiwan is in the global semiconductor value chain, even with adjustments, any type of disruption to access to Taiwan's semiconductors output is going to have tremendous consequences for the global economy, according to Martin Rasser, a former senior intelligence officer at the CIA, who is now a security and technology expert at the Center for a New American Security. And if the U.S. allies, for instance, impose significant sanctions on Chinese imports following an invasion, there could be a quote, huge impact on American consumers and the U.S. economy generally, end quote, according to William Allen Range, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is a national security think tank. Rasser continues to say it would be a much more challenging in the China context, just because of the country's economic interdependencies that there are. The impacts of a potential conflict on the global food supply chain would be devastating, and it would be even worse than the impact on grain and wheat from the Ukraine war. China is literally the world's largest producer of agricultural goods, and many countries depend on them for food imports. Along with an economic crisis, several underdeveloped countries could face famine. According to the Global Guardian, China is the world's largest producer of nitrogenic fertilizers, a major producer of farming equipment, and a key component of the global food processing supply chain. Two of the world's other biggest fertilizer and food producers, Ukraine and Russia, are producing and exporting under capacity due to the war and sanctions. The loss of Chinese inputs to food production would raise costs for both farmers and consumers across the board. The loss of access to the Chinese market would lower revenues for Western and particularly American farmers, precisely at a time of increased costs for fertilizer and farming equipment, a double sided shock to both supply and demand. The underdeveloped countries of the world would see increased food costs, exacerbating its current food insecurity challenge. And finally, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would drag in several countries in the Asia Pacific region, not only the US, and because Japan and South Korea would most likely get involved as well. And this conflict could easily devolve into World War III. As well as the global implications, there could be internal turmoil in China if the Chinese military suffers extreme military setbacks, regardless if they win the war or not. According to Peter Bergbauer, the director of business development at 50 International, however, the last thing she wants is a humiliating defeat at the hands of the United States, exposing the fraudulence of his military and the Communist Party, and potentially impacting his own legacy. The stakes are extremely high for a potential invasion of Taiwan, and she might not prove to be the risk taker that Putin. Given this data, it would be in the best interest of China, Taiwan, and the US not to fight a devastating war because the consequences of this conflict would be detrimental to all parties.